Good morning. I'm going to continue my series on the first American Congress from 1857 in New York, and we're into the second round. Morphy handily won 3-0 against James Thompson in the first round. In the second round, he played Alexander Meek. Alexander Meek, like Morphy, was from the southern United States and was a lawyer. He got a successful practice as a lawyer and judge, and eventually moved into political administration, first on the state level, and eventually he became assistant or deputy Treasury Secretary, what in Britain we would call the Chancellor Exchequer, and here in Norway we call the assisterende finansminister. So, yeah, successful in politics and jurisprudence. Let's see if he's as clever with his chessboard manoeuvring as he was with his political manoeuvring. Here, Meek plays white and Morphy plays black. The game starts with e4 and e5. Yeah, that's nothing to complain over. Knight comes to f3, attacks the pawn, and develops a piece. Morphy develops another piece and attacks the pawn. Bishop comes to b5 to attack the knight, and Morphy plays the so-called Berlin defense. There is a variation of the Spanish Roy Lopez opening named after Morphy, which is a6, the Morphy defense. But here he plays the Berlin defense. Yeah, you might think he could take the knight, and then the bishop is taken, then he can win the pawn on e5. It doesn't work because black takes back away from the centre for once with the d pawn, so that the king, the queen, if the pawn is taken, the queen can come to d4 and threaten the knight on e5 and the pawn on e4. The knight has to retreat, and the pawn on e4 is taken, and yeah, no pawn lost, and maybe a relatively poor position for white. So of course Meek doesn't go for that. He defends his pawn with d3. Now he is threatening to do the things we just discussed. Morphy develops his bishop. We know Morphy loves to develop pieces. This does work against winning the pawn, as described, even though the pawn on e4 is now defended, because now if he takes the knight, the queen's pawn takes. If the knight takes the pawn, then the queen comes as before to e4, but this time he's threatening mate here and on f2, and he's threatening the knight, and there's no square he can go to where the knight defends f2, so he would have to give up the knight for the pawn, and he'd be a piece down. So yeah, so he doesn't take the pawn now. Morphy effectively defends it in a tactical way with developments at the same time. c3, it is played a great deal in the Berlin defense. It is although you might think it is a move from the Spanish game, you might think, well, doesn't this belong at home in the Italian game? Yeah, it does, but it's okay. I think this c3 move is a favourite of Carlsen's, actually. d6, supporting the pawn. Alright, he can take the knight and give him double pawns, but for that he has to give up the two bishops. So yeah. Now b5, yeah, what can I say? Not my favourite move here. It's not developing. Alright, it does appear to gain some space on the queen side, but it does make a great deal of weaknesses in white's position, and it's very easy for black to just retreat out of the way. So now he comes with another pawn, looking like an even better space grab. But Morphy moves his pawn, threatens the knight, and at the same time threatens the bishop, and at the same time gives a retreat square for his own bishop. Bishop retreats to c4, and Morphy challenges it immediately with developments. Meek takes back, and Morphy takes the bishop. So, good point to take a minute and look at the position and see what we think. Yeah, there are advantages and disadvantages to both sides of the board. White obviously has the double pawns. Black obviously has the double pawns. And white appears to have more space, well, does have more space on the queen side. But how useful is that space for him? And in return for the double pawns in the centre and the weakening of this diagonal, the fact that this pawn is always going to be backwards and possibly subject to attack, what does black have for that? Well, he has the possibility of playing d5 and beginning active operation in the centre, excuse me. As soon as he castles short, his rook will be placed on f8 on a half-open file already. A half-open file where the bishop is pointing to f2. So there are potentials there. So yeah, he gets something for it. Both sides castle. And Meek plays knight to g5 to attack the weak pawn on e6. I think it's a short-sighted one-move threat. The pawn can be defended and the knight can be chased away. Yeah, I don't think, I think he would have done better to concentrate on developing his pieces rather than making these single move threats, because how does Morphy respond to that? He responds to that by developing a piece. So he's finished with development, and Meek still has this knight, this bishop, and this queen to move before he is finished with development. So he's 3 moves behind in development, and these queenside pawns, they're very airy. There's holes all over the show. I don't think black is doing too badly here. I guess okay, an appropriate moment to take a little pause and carry on thinking of how we can be better at evaluating positions. So if we think for a moment here, what will the computer say about this position in terms of analysis? Put the video on pause if you need to come up with a number, and when you've done that, I'll come up with a number myself. There is no wrong answers. Even if you're wildly off in the answer, you've tried, you've thought about it, and you get better at it, and the answer you give next time will be better. So, are you ready? Before we look at the analysis, I'm going to guess this is about 1.3 to black, or the number it'll show in the analysis is minus 1.3 roughly. Okay, let's see how accurate I were, and let's see how accurate you were in your assessment. No. It says plus 0.2 to white. Okay. There must be resources in the position which I, as a human, have not thought of. Yeah, okay, we'll get rid of the analysis and see what happens next. White plays h1. Again, he hasn't done anything about the d4 possibility. Again, okay, probably his thinking is that he wants to be able to play f4 and attack what now appears to be a reasonably strong centre for white. That I can understand. But white just plays h6 and chases the knight away. And my main problem with the move king h1 is it doesn't do anything about the possibility of white playing d5. And of course he does that. Breaks up the centre straight away. And now it's Meek's turn to try and answer that with a tactical defense. The idea is that he will play, if Morphy plays pawn takes pawn, then Meek will play pawn to b5, threaten the knight, and also threaten the queen, and also threaten the rook behind. Yeah, quite a clever idea. Morphy plays his knight to d8. It might look like a terribly backwards move. It isn't really such a bad move. It's a good place for the knight. If I'd already had the opportunity to play this rook to e8, I'd be delighted with the move e8 because the knight is defending the weakest point in my position, the 8 square, and the rooks would be connected and everything would be just fine. But we didn't get there yet. So he goes ahead and plays the plan. I think sometimes we can get a bit obsessed with plans. He planned this. Morphy responded in a way which made the plan less effective, and he played it anyway. So Morphy plays bishop to c5, rightly saying, yeah, great, I'm willing to go for that swap off if you are. And Meek retreats. And so, yeah, the end result of that little maneuvering is that black has a better position now. Right. So he takes the pawn, and Meek attacks the bishop. Morphy takes the pawn, and the bishop is attacked again. The bishop goes to d6, aiming here. So it hasn't been chased to a worse square, it's been chased to another great diagonal. So the knight develops. He's going to be ganging up to try and get this pawn back at some point in time. Morphy takes the pawn, and Meek takes the pawn back. And Morphy, ever the developer, comes out with the knight to f7. What an excellent square for that knight. Might be heading to this square at some point in time if you can get rid of this pawn. Might be heading here. Might be heading here. It's really good defensive duties, and it unites the rook. But notice the manoeuvring has led to that, as soon as Meek moves his queen off the back rank, then they're both finished with development. And you might say he's just one move behind now. And he addresses that with moving the queen to e2 now and doubling up his threat on the e pawn. So he's looking at getting his pawn back so that he has 5 against 6, not 5 against 7. Morphy can't really contest that, but he attacks another pawn instead. The knight is taken. The pawn is taken by the knight, and Morphy takes the knight back, and the queen takes. He takes the pawn. He's willing to give up this pawn. Of course, he can't take that pawn at the minute because the knight will be, the bishop on b2 will be lost. So, Meek plays bishop to b2. It's a really reasonably good performance by Meek. And now he's threatening to move the bishop and expose an attack on the queen, and also an attack on the pawn behind it. So, yeah, decent stuff. So, Morphy proposes a queen exchange. Obviously, if he takes the queen, then the pawn comes here, so the pawn is in the way of the bishop. The bishop is automatically poor, and his idea of attacking this pawn won't come to fruition. So Meek doesn't take the queen. He retreats to g4. Yeah, good active place. If he ever gets this pawn moved f, then he's got an automatic double attack on g2, a mate threat. But don't hold your breath waiting for him to get that chance. So the rook comes to e4, so that, yeah, he's putting more pressure on the d pawn. Maybe no c5 to pressure the d pawn, and then he's got a chance of creating a, c5 creates a pass pawn on the b file for him, and threatens to create a pass pawn on the d file as well. So the knight comes to f4 to attack the queen and the pawn at the same time. and the queen comes to a great move to e5. He defends with the pawn with the queen. So if he takes with the queen, Morphy will take the knight. If he takes with the knight, Morphy will take with the queen. So he can't yet win the weakened d6 pawn. So the bishop supports the knight, so they can win the weakened d6 pawn. So he takes the pawn, and then he takes the pawn, and suddenly he's got two passed pawns on the queen side. And this pawn's defended by the queen. He can't take this pawn because it's pinned to the queen. He moves his queen out of the way to free up his bishop, but of course, big problem with that is that the queen is now free to take the bishop. I think the game might have continued for some moves because in chessgames.com it says and white and black wins. Often this was how chess games written up in newspaper columns or magazines. That was often how the end was described, and white wins, or as in this case, and black wins. And so maybe there was other moves, maybe not. Just it's difficult to say. And of course, record keeping in chess in the 1850s, even though it was efficient and thorough, wasn't quite like it is today. So, sometimes it can be harder to track down what moves were actually played in these classic games from the 1850s. So, yeah, I think we should be thankful to the people who do the chasing down of these openings from these games from the 1850s, 1860s, and so on. So yeah, with that, Morphy took the lead in his first of three match against Alexander Meek in the First American Congress. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to my videos. And we'll see another game between Morphy and Meek tomorrow. Thanks. Bye.